In this video, we're going to teach you how to compensate for maldischarge in an older panel in which adjustments have not been sufficient to remove the maldischarge. As an example on the screen, you can see a television that has a maldischarge issue. You can notice the areas where the maldischarge will display, such as the highlights or the washed out image that will show up. The control board on this television utilizes software that is specifically designed to create the waveform that drives this panel. The initial setup for the plasma panel requires an alignment not only of the DC voltages but of the waveform that drives off the Y-sustain board. These DC adjustments are located on a label, or what we call a panel voltage label. You must pre-align the television back to factory specs using the panel label. And a quick way to do that is to download the PDP Alignment Handbook off the Learning Academy website. And there you'll have some 19 some odd panels that will explain this procedure. But you must align the panel before you attempt to do the ROM download. To do the ROM download will require you having a ROM download jig. This jig will interface between your computer and the control board and allow you to update the control board software. To do this, you're going to be interfacing your computer through USB port, which requires some drivers to install. Then it will require some drivers to install that will allow it to communicate with a board. And then through an Excel table, you will look up the PDP panel model number and associate that with a software file. And you will open the software file in a program that is also required for this jig called Flashdown. And then you will open that control board software and update the control board, which will then minutely manipulate the Y drive wave signal, which will compensate for your maldischarge issue and bring your panel back into good operating condition. So the first thing we're going to do is show you how to install the software onto your computer, which allows you to interface with the jig, and then how to install the software into the control board to compensate for maldischarge. To perform the software upgrade, you should receive a disc. This disc will include many items of training material, training packages, and etc. But the key important fact for us is to get to the ROM download software that will allow us to interface to our jig. When you install the CD, it should automatically appear on your screen with a startup page. I've put this in a couple of different ways that you could access the software. One is right to the actual presentation, which is a Adobe format version of what I'm trying to explain to you on the video. Inside the Adobe version is links that will allow you to access the software and install it on your computer. It's in a zip file which is self-extracting. Simply double-click the zip file and it will download all the software into specific folders. Do not disrupt those folders or change them so that you can remember the location and follow along with them in the presentation. The first thing we have to do is install the USB driver. So what I would recommend is first go straight to the self-extracting zip file link and click on the self-extracting link. This should allow, first of all, a warning screen or security screen as it reads the software to come up and tell you, do you want to run this file? Say, run. And then it'll say, this is an unknown publisher. Click run. Now it begins the program. And as you can see, it will put it right in your root directory, in this case C:\\. So simply hit unzip. it will extract all of the software files, all of the drivers, the Excel sheet, all into these folders. 35 different files will be now extracted. When completed, click OK. Close the screen, and now you have the files installed on your computer. Now there's several ways we can approach what we're going to do here. The recommendation is that when you install the USB port to your jig, you're going to get a warning screen that tells you new hardware found. And then you're going to begin to install the software required. So I'll show you as we connect this jig. Simply connect the USB port to your computer, and the USB, which looks very similar to a USB printer cable, into the jig's USB port. You'll notice an LED illuminates, indicating that the board is now powered up. Then you will navigate to that folder. Now you might not remember all of this off your head, but if over time this will come. Double click on the Windows Explorer and go straight to the C drive. As you recall, that was the root directory in our unzip procedure. And then find the new folder called PDP ROM Control Software Files. And double click. Now you see the subfolders. Underneath there is one called CTL PWB software. It stands for Control Board Software. These are where all of your files will be maintained that directly relate to the control board that you are updating. Driver. These are the drivers for the USB communication to the board. So when you install your jig and it says new hardware found, you will navigate to the drivers folder and install the drivers for this board. Then it will ask you to install the drivers that communicate with the board. And it's also in that drivers folder. When complete, you will now be able to communicate to your control board. Then you will be asked to open the flash down program. Now I recommend you click on the program folder, of which you now see the flash down program, in this case Flashdown 3.1 EXE. Right click, select Send To, and hit Desktop and create a shortcut. Now if you close Explorer, you will find on your desktop the flash down shortcut icon. Double click and you will open the flash down program. Now at this point, we are still not communicating to our television. We are simply communicating to the jig itself. Before we talk to our control board, there are a few steps you need to take. Remember, you must have completed all of your adjustments to the panel before proceeding. All. Power supply, VAVS, and 5 volt if required. YSUS PWB, every adjustment that's listed on the label. VScan minus VY and setup if necessary. Z-board, Z-bias. And then finally the waveform adjustment, which you're going to get out of the Plasma Alignment Handbook you download off the Learning Academy. When you're all through, you probably have fixed your maldischarge already. But if you run into a panel that it still needs more adjustment and you have completed your alignments, now is where this software becomes involved. So we need to update our control board with new software. The procedure for that is, one, we have to energize or turn on the control board. Now we can do that simply by applying power to the panel and getting it energized, but some panels have an issue with that, because during the software upgrade, when the ROM is erased, the ROM will actually shut off the panel. And of course when that happens, you lose your 5 volts to the control board. When that happens, the software communication quits. And now the control board is sitting there with empty ROM memory. or in other words, the ROM board or control board, or some people call logic board, the logic board now becomes useless. If you run into that situation, you can recover this, and I'll show you how. But the normal procedure to avoid any of that problem is to constantly maintain 5 volts on the control board at all times. Now, one advantage to that is every switch mode power supply has a standby 5 volts that keeps the main board alive at all times. You simply borrow the standby 5 and put it on the standby 5 test point or location for your control board. So let's do that. A simple method for that is utilizing a jumper cable with 2 safety pins. The safety pins make it easy to insert into the connectors on both ends. So the first thing to do is look on your connectors and find your standby 5 volt location. In this case, I found it here, standby 5. And then go to your control board and again locate your standby 5. Now, in many cases, there's several ways to do this. Let me just quickly explain. There are fuses that protect the control board. No problem, you can use those to clip onto. You can also turn on the control board before you do this and take your voltmeter and find the regulators on the board and locate the 5 volt test point and use that. Very simple and straightforward. Or you can simply go over and find the label where 5 volts is brought into the board. In this case, we will attach it by inserting the safety pin. Now, one precaution about this is when you have the safety pin, you do have the metal lead sticking off of the safety pin. Don't allow them to short out. Now, one final recommendation: move the connector that delivers VS and VA to the Y sustain board. That will deactivate all of your driver FETs. If there's a separate connector from the power supply to the Z sustain board, remove that as well. All right, now we have our standby 5 connected separately to our control board. Now, how would you know if you're working sufficiently or have made a correct connection? When you have standby 5 routed directly to the control board, you should see the LED illuminate on the control board, indicating to you that it is now powered up. Remove AC power, and then locate on your control board the connection for the jig. In this case, to make it easier, I will remove the LVDS cable. And right beside the LVDS cable is the connection for the jig. Now, you can have a 14-pin, a 12-pin, or a 4-pin connection. In the presentation or the document that explains this procedure, it'll show you how to identify each one. On the jig, you have connections for 4-pin, and then, of course, the 15 and 12-pin connections side by side. So we just find the correct connector and connect it to our jig interface connector. Make sure that you have nothing that could short out on the back of your board and lay it to the side. Now, reapply AC power to the control board. Now listen, it's even okay to do this with that board removed from the set. As long as you supply it with a 5 volt supply, you'll be all right. Now we have the interface between our jig, which is energized, our driver's installed, our control board is illuminated, meaning it's running. So now we go back to our flashdown program. You can do a couple of procedures here, but let me just walk you through the straightforward and simple way to do it. The first thing is you want to open the Excel sheet. Now, if you can't remember where that is, I will go back to Windows Explorer, and here you have a link directly to the Excel sheet. Or you can open up the program document, and inside there is also another link. So we open up our Excel sheet, and what this will do will allow us to access a Excel table And in this table, we will find our panel model number. On the panel label is a model that is listed. They generally begin with PDP. That just stands for a plasma display panel. Ignore that. You look for the first number, which in this case is a 50-inch, and it's an X3 panel, a 50X3. Come to your table and walk it down till you find a 50X3. We find the 50X3 on our table, and we look to the right, we find the files that associate with this panel. Now, there are many methods to locate what software you may use, because some panels have 4 or 5 softwares that will install to the ROM, and some only have one. The ones that are one are easy. The ones that have multiple files, you have to make sure to read on your ROM, on your control board, there is a white sticker. The white sticker will actually have the panel model number, 50X3. It'll associate with this panel's number. And then right after that, it will give you some suffix numbers and letters indicating the software version. And if you come back to your table, then you can associate the panel and software version to match your control board software requirements. In this case, on our 50X3, we have 2 files. We could look it up and read it off of the control board, or if you'll read carefully up here, it says use this file for every one of them except the 50PY2DR. And in this case, it says use the 50PY2DR only, which we are looking at. So your file will be the 50X3 DNCSO2A. That is the actual number. Now, to the right of that is a column. At the top, it's called checksum. This is a critical component of this procedure. Checksum means that you're going to match the checksum of the file after you are through uploading it to the control board, and make sure the control board received every piece of data that required. Or in other words, the entire allocation table inside memory is filled. So here's what we do. We now know the file name that we need. Go back to the flash down program and select first what size of flash memory you have. In the program, it shows you close-up details. Look on your ROM chip, remember the one with the white label? And it will actually tell you the size of the ROM. So in this one, it's a 32 meg. Next, what type of connection are we using? In our case, we're using a 15 pin. So you select 15 pin. Next, serial clock rate. You can preset this up at different intervals. It doesn't really matter until you run into a problem. Generally, we have found out that 13 or 15 are the best. But if you have problems, you can raise or lower that number if there's some issues. Preset it for 15, and most often there will be no problem. Now, if you look, we are through with all our presets. So now go to the Open tab. When you click Open, you will have to navigate to the subfolder I showed you at the beginning of this video, or this identified in your program material. You would simply click and navigate to the PDP ROM control software files, and then go to the subfolder Control PWB Software. Click on that. Now, fortunately, after you do this one time, the program should remember that file location as long as you don't move it. Now navigate over till you find the file that it told us to download in our Excel sheet. In this case, we find it's the 50X3DN SC02. Select and click Open. Now, when you did that, you're going to notice a couple of things. One, the actual file name shows up at here, and you can see there is a checksum number at the end. Then if you look down here, it's going to say it read the file that was on your computer and it matched the checksum, and those two checksums are equal. You're good to go. So now you go down to Auto. And when you click on Auto, a couple of sequences begins. First, it erases all memory that's already in the control board ROM. Now, as this procedure is going, remember, some of our panels, that will cause the panel to shut down. That's why you had to add the standby 5. Once it's finished erasing, now it begins to download and move that software into the ROM. During this process, it's loading up all of the address locations inside our control board ROM. Now it's verifying. In other words, making sure that our software here and our software there match, and then it says verify OK, meaning we're good to go. But before you leave, before you disconnect anything, look at the checksum and look at the checksum on the file. They should match. If they match, you have completed the upgrade. I would recommend at this time, remove AC power from your panel. Remove the jig connector and set it to the side. Remove the standby 5 jump. Before reapplying power, I would recommend the first thing you do, connect your meter to chassis ground, put it into volts, and test your VS power supply. Make sure that it has dropped to a very low voltage. Do a quick check on your VA. Make sure it's dropped. All that's good. Okay to reconnect our Y sustain board as well as our Z sustain if that was necessary. So I'm reconnecting my LVDS or video connector. All our connectors are back in place. I'm reapplying AC power. And now, as you note, all the maldischarge has been eliminated, both in the high bright areas and the dark areas. We do not have the maldischarge issue, and the software upgrade is complete with a new software. If after you have completed the control board ROM update, and you still notice some minor maldischarge issues, if you'll go back to the table where you were looking at the Excel chart, under your software version, there is another column that indicates notes. In this column, it will talk about voltage adjustments. Let me explain this column to you because this is critical. 1, you pre-align your plasma panel and you find maldischarge. 2, you run the ROM update program and install new software. If the TV looks great or looks fine, you are through. Even if there are notes in the voltage adjustment column. However, if after doing both the pre-alignment and the update and you still have some minor maldischarge issues, now you would go to the voltage adjustment and read what it says. Some of them will have you bring down the Z bias adjustment slightly. Some will have you bring down both VS and VA, some form of minor adjustment. If you have to make a minor adjustment to the already listed voltage label, it is important that you modify the label by scratching out the original reading and writing in the new voltage setting that the table recommends. That way, if a service technician follows you sometime in the future and finds out that they have to make some minor adjustments, or they replace a board and have to make some adjustments, they want to match the new software that you install. That is why it's critical that you write this information down on the label. If you run into some abnormal conditions while you're trying to upgrade the ROM software, please look in the document that's on your CD, and it will explain what are some possible faults, such as loss of standby 5, such as loss of communication or the connection's bad, some form of error has occurred, even like you've selected the wrong memory size or you've selected the wrong clock speed. All of those can cause some kind of glitch when it's communicating and verifying your software. All that should be answered for you in the program material.